Okay, and tonight we are the Journal of Expressive Writing open mic on November 7th, 2024. We are so happy to welcome you here to Dorsia Smith Silva's featured reading of her poetry collection, as well as 14 or so writers who will be reading in our open mic towards the end, the second half of the evening. I'm Kelly DuMar, and I host this open mic, and I want to introduce you to Jennifer Minotti, who is the founder and editor of the Journal of Expressive Writing. She does all the work behind the scenes and much more in order to make this event happen. Jen, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Dorsia. It's such a thrill to have you tonight. We're so grateful that you're with us. And thank you to all of the people who will be reading tonight and to all of the listeners, because poets and writers need listeners. So I'm super grateful for everyone who came tonight, knowing that you have lots of other places you can be. Thank you.
So Jen, just a reminder, if you wouldn't mind posting the reading list again, because I think people who come in after there's a posting don't see the original one. So we want you to check
Absolutely.
the chat room and see the open mic reading list. Make sure if you are supposed to be on it, that you're on it. If you have any question about that, feel free to directly chat to Jen. She'll respond to your questions, and also make sure your little Hollywood square has your correct name on it. And oh my gosh, somebody's tuning in. Stephen, hello, tuning in from Patagonia. How wonderful. So we really have a fascinating group out here. We're meeting tonight in a week that has been challenging for some of us, many of us. And so I often like to open our evening with a poem, and I do have one tonight. I'm not actually going to be able to read the whole thing because it's a kind of a long poem, but I will put the link in the chat room in case you want to look at the poem again after I read. I'm going to read excerpts from it, all right? And I think this is a poem that is really relevant, possibly, to what many of us are going through and experiencing this week. And I know I'm really grateful to be here tonight in this community at this time. So this is a poem by Araceli Gourmet. You are who I love. You selling roses out of a silver grocery cart. You in the park, feeding the pigeons. You cheering for the bees. You with cats in your voice in the morning, feeding cats. You protecting the river. You are who I love, delivering babies, nursing the sick. You with henna on your feet and a gold star in your nose. You taking your medicine, reading the magazines. You looking into the faces of young people as they pass, smiling and saying, all right, which they know it means I see you, family. I love you. Keep on. You dancing in the kitchen, on the sidewalk, in the subway, waiting for the train because Stevie Wonder, Hector Lavoe, La Loupe. You stirring the pots of beans, you washing your father's feet. You are who I love, you reciting Darwish, then June, feeding your heart, teaching your parents how to do the doogie, counting to 10, reading your patient's charts. You are who I love, changing policies, standing in line for water, stocking the food pantries, making a meal. You are who I love, you struggling to see, you struggling to love or find a question. You better than me, you kinder and so blistering with anger. You are who I love, standing in the wind, salvaging the umbrellas, graduating from school, wearing holes in your shoes. You are who I love, weeping or touching the faces of the weeping. you who the borders crossed, you whose fires, you decent with rage, so in love with the earth, you writing poems alongside children, you cactus, water, sparrow, crow, you my elder, you are who I love, summoning the courage, making the cobbler. You are who I love, who stands at the courthouse with the sign that reads, no justice, no peace. You are who I love, learning English, learning Spanish, drawing flowers on your hand with a ballpoint pen, taking the bus home. How fuck you becomes a love song. You at the edges and shores and the rooms of quiet and the rooms of shouting in the airport terminal at the bus depot saying no, and each of us looking out from the gorgeous unlikelihood of our lives at all, finding ourselves here, witnesses to each other's tenderness, which this moment is fury, is rage, which this moment is another way of saying, you are who I love, you are who I love, you, and you are who. Thank you, Arcelis Gourmet. And now, thank goodness, live and in the flesh, wonderfully here to read for us tonight. I want to introduce you to our featured writer, Dorsia Smith Silva. I want to tell you a little bit about what Publishers Weekly says about her book, Inheritance of Drowning, which, you know what, we are preempting her launch, which isn't officially until November 11th. This book is brand new, hasn't even been launched in the world. How wonderful, how timely to have Dorsia here with us tonight. Publishers Weekly says Dorsia Smith Silva navigates the treacherous waters of displacement and survival in the wake of natural disaster in this luminous and innovative debut, centered on Hurricane Maria's devastation of Puerto Rico in 2017. These poems excavate the enduring impacts of colonialism, racism, and environmental catastrophe on marginalized communities. In The Awakening of Hurricane Maria, Smith Silva captures the storm's disorientation and trauma. Quote, thunder shudders through the treetops while lightning siphons off the breath like fragrant heat. Elsewhere, she shifts from intimate familial portraits to a broader meditations on systemic injustice. Poems such as Everyday Drowning and While Black confront racial violence and oppression in the United States, while others probe identity and belonging as a Puerto Rican. With a finely tuned ear for rhythm and syntax, Smith Silva unearths unexpected beauty amid devastation, insisting on a resilience that envisions uncombed gardens last where only hurricanes stay. This noteworthy collection bears unflinching witness to calamity while still kindling hope for renewal. We did not know how much we would need Dorsia's voice here with us tonight. In an interview with Dorsia, Kathleen Casson-Mickelson says about her collection, Inheritance of Drowning is at its heart a collection of protest and political poetry. It is a call to action, an insistence to find a more compassionate way of living in this world, a life preserver tossed to any outstretched hand. Welcome, Dorsia Smith Silva. It's wonderful to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly and Jen. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And thank you all so much for coming this evening. I can't wait to hear the open mic. And thank you again, Kelly, for that lovely introduction. You know, just the book, it's not out yet in the world, but it's coming soon. Thank you for the applause. Thank you for the support. And the book launch is next week. So I encourage you all to come if you have some time. I know that it's been a heavy time, but I think sometimes with a sense of community, you may feel like, you know, okay, all is not lost. So I'm hoping tonight that we come together in a sense of community. So I'm going to be reading tonight some poems from the book, and I will end with a positive poem because the book has a lot of what I call heavy poems that are really encouraging you to think about our interactions with the environment and really asking for us to kind of explore the social, racial, and political injustices that are happening right now in the United States. So the overall goal of the book is to get us to have a social transformation. And we're going to start, I hope, tonight. So I'm going to start reading with the very first poem in the book. It's a format of an Ars Poetica, which is a poem that really asks us, what is the poet supposed to write? And with this poem, what I really wanted to do was to get us to think about the meaning of hurricanes. Because if you look on the map for hurricanes, you see all these bright circles. And from an artistic mind, the circles look in a way beautiful. You know, you see all these circles and all these bright colors and you think, oh, this is beautiful. But then when you really think about the meaning, it's very frightening because that's the span of the hurricane. So I thought, you know, what if we had, you know, a different interpretation of looking at a hurricane? What if we just had circles on a Doppler radar map? What if they were just bright colors and we could just admire them for that? Of course, that's not the case, but this is what I was interpreting when I wrote the poem. So what the poet is supposed to write about a hurricane. What the poet is supposed to write about a hurricane should be skylights of horror, not skip rocks of beauty in walls of wind, affixed to the puzzle pieces of the vortex eye, spinning like a lost continent soul. How the lively whips should stun the mouths of gravity, hissing without hesitation, engulfing the stench of uprooted dirt and grass. The poet is supposed to decode the stanzas, shudder the name Maria into frail syllables, to wish a hurricane a fast and gritty death, not say its stubborn slow dances, held intoxicating possibilities and mysteries. So that's in an ideal world. But unfortunately, as I was just saying when we opened, here we are in November with Hurricane Rafael. You know, my fingers are crossed that Florida will be okay, that Louisiana will be okay, that Texas will be okay. I know that Cuba right now, they're without power in certain parts of Cuba. Jamaica has some flooding and hurricane season doesn't end till the end of November. So I'm just hoping that we can just get through this season without any more hurricanes. The next poem I'm going to read is a poem about why people actually leave places that have been hit by hurricanes. And I think if you've been reading the newspaper or watching the news, you have people in Florida that are leaving, you have people in Texas that are leaving, people in North Carolina that are thinking about leaving because they worry, okay, if hurricane season is June to November, what's going to come next year? Can we go through this experience again? This has just been too traumatic for us. We're going to move to another place. So in this poem, it's called the Q&A section. It's why people actually left Puerto Rico, not by choice, but because they are so traumatized from what has happened after the hurricane. If you ask me why I left Puerto Rico, I would tell you that it wasn't because Hurricane Maria left me with a bloated album of waiting for the blackouts to skip between the trees. It wasn't because the roofs unfurled and the doors retreated to hollows somewhere in the sky. It wasn't because of the shells of water, inching like new constellations across an endless night. It was the full circle of fear, the kind that stays in my mouth like neon jawbreakers, refusing to surrender, tailor-made to dislocate words that I long to speak. I dread colliding against this familiar, when the memory gathers like burning hands around your throat. So that's the only way I can think about, you know, unfortunately, what we go through every season now with hurricane season. And people ask me, well, why do you stay? Well, this is your home, you know, you stay. But at the same time, we have to think about what we're doing to the environment to keep having these intense hurricanes and these hurricane seasons that you know, most of the hurricanes that come are in September, and here we are having a major one in November. So we do have to think about why we keep having, you know, these intense hurricanes and why the season is just, you know, so incredibly long. The next poem I'm going to read again is for those that had to leave because of different reasons. And this one is for those that had to leave. You go to a shelter, you realize the shelter is not that safe for different reasons. And then when you go to United States, especially after Hurricane Maria, going to the United States was packaged for many people as this ideal utopia. You know, you're leaving Puerto Rico, you're going to the United States, everything's going to be fine. But what happens when you encounter a world that treats you as other? And so this is a poem that explores that. It's called When You Tap the Muscle Memory of the Blue Tarp. And the blue tarp is what FEMA gave many people in Puerto Rico because the roofs caved in. There was, you know, problems with the ceiling. And they said, okay, here's this blue tarp until your roof gets fixed. And for many people, the roofs are still waiting to be fixed. I was just saying in another interview that in my area, we finally settled with the insurance company. It's been 7 years. We're finally getting our money to fix things that have been damaged. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. And even though we settled a month ago, we're still waiting for the check. So it's ridiculous. And I think this is how people stay. You know, we've talked about drowning. This is how people stay drowning because they may not have the financial resources to, you know, fix their property, and you're entitled to that insurance money. So this is a poem, again, about the injustices, what happens when you leave. When you tap the muscle memory of the blue tarp that was supposed to be a temporary roof, but broke. So you moved into the school shelter, but stayed up all night because you were afraid at how the men looked at you like something on the clearance rack. And then some cousin of a cousin said, you can come to New York on an amnesty flight. And your other cousin of a cousin got you on board. And you said, this is it, I'm home. But home turned into, where are you from? And where are your papers? I'm an American citizen. I'm Puerto Rican. This looks fake to me, this ID. Next. So you were told that no one stays here for free, and then you get a job paying minimum wage, even though you know you should be paid more. And during your 15-minute break, you stare at the lampposts and pretend that they are palm trees from your island. A tear falls, and someone says that there's no time to cry. Besides, tears are not meant for brown girls. You have to get back to your shift because there are bills to pay, and you want that return ticket, which isn't cheap. So I'm going to read one more hurricane poem, and I'm going to read this one because sometimes we think of the damage that gets done to our homes, our possessions. We think about the earth suffering when we look at the grass and the rivers, but we don't think sometimes of the animals and the insects and the other creatures of the earth that get affected. So this is a poem called The Bee, and this poem means so much to me because when we had Hurricane Maria, in the aftermath, I saw the bees. They were so, you know, they were in a state of disorientation. They didn't know what was happening because one moment we have all this vegetation, you know, beautiful flowers, gardens, and the next minute everything is gone. So they were literally like walking, you know, on our patio, like looking for, you know, flowers. And we didn't have electricity. So I had, you know, all our things outside on, you know, different racks trying to dry. And this poor bee was trying to pollinate, you know, my undergarment, you know, my brassiere. And so I thought, you know, yeah, this poor bee. And I thought, you know, there's nothing there. But it ended up becoming a poem. And I mentioned that because we really do need to think more about what we're doing with the environment. I mean, sometimes people don't want to think about the climate crisis, global warming, but it's not just affecting us, it's affecting really all the creatures here on this planet. So this is a poem called The Bee. After Hurricane Maria, you spin in a daze, punched drunk from the fetid fumes of the generator, but you have made a decision to eat, live. You leap onto a dark tan bra that is wildly flapping on the clothesline, eager to gather something sweet and bring it to the surface. And yet there is nothing there but a bare circle of cotton. You wonder how the hurricane galloped away with the flowers, triggering a vanishing act. Well, where is the magician's wand to bring back the canopy of blossoms? It must be in the wind of loss, along with the why and because. There is no way to tell you about the aftermath, slow cruelty. It is a tale that claws cell by cell, leaving wings to litter this earth. So now I'm going to move into some political poems. I think I have time, yes, to look at just a few political poems. This is a poem called They Came for Us. And this is what we're experiencing right now in Puerto Rico, and many places are also experiencing this as well, where you have a bunch of wealthy outsiders coming in and they buy property, they push the middle class out, as well as other people that are trying to save and perhaps buy property or even rent property. And then what's happening with a lot of the islands is they're making what's supposed to be public access to, certain venues for the beach, they're blocking that. And so this is what is happening, not only in Puerto Rico, but to other places in the Caribbean and internationally too, where people come in and the government on the one hand says, well, we welcome because we want your financial investment. But on the other hand, we don't want you to take over, but you can't have both. I mean, that's where we are right now in Puerto Rico. It's becoming, a major conflict of how much wealthy investors are coming and what they're getting access to, and blocking the people, the residents that have lived here for years. So this is They Came for Us. This is the poem They Came for Us. And the only thing I think you need to know, there's a little Spanish in the poem. Zucaritas, that's frosted flakes in Spanish. And then when I say y que no pasó means what happened, and estás muriendo means we are dying, and deja de matarnos means stop killing us. Okay, they came for us. Out of the woodwork with their sun-bleached smiles and sea-sprayed tans, tendons of cash to trademark residences, fat-backing the coast. In return, bow-legged access to beaches, aerosol sight of skies, coupon books of what was ours. On Saturday and Sunday morning commercials showing jovial kids eating mac and cheese with orange sauce and zucaritas to cut off a foot or leg, maybe even, sorry folks, an eye or two. Abuela's meal shooed into the other room. At the invitation of the government, come to paradise. And so they came, and so they stayed. And so they said, demanded, and so they destroyed and conquered. ¿Y qué nos pasó? Estamos muriendo. Deja de matarnos. Let's have this conversation in English. Those aberrations are your own making. If you turn into a myth, then that's your problem. Look, you can still have the chupacabra. It will not rat you out. There's your glow-up limb. Now grow yourself back. And for those that don't know what the chupacabra is, it's like, this Bigfoot, this beast. It's like part animal, part human, and it's like a mythical creature. So it's saying, at the end, here you go, this is yours, and that's it. Now I'm going to move into another political poem. This is for all the BIPOC women that go missing. It's called Ghost Talker Poem. Even though the book says Black girls, it's for all the BIPOC women that go missing and do not get national coverage. I think that it's a disgrace that it doesn't happen and that more people don't talk about that. Ghost Talker Poem. And for the Black girls that go missing from newspaper headlines and Spotlight 5 p.m. news, what happened to them? Kick the can over, see if the bones glint in the slips of sunshine. Press your ears against the grass, listen to what bleeds. My mother in her lovely tongue. Those girls are probably with friends, hanging out in the basement, wearing cigarette pants. Cigarette pants were fashionable once. They will turn up like loose change sidelined under sofa cushions, overdue books sandwiched in sweaters, favorite hairpins gagged by vents. Don't fret. Fret is a funny word for a young child. Sounds like forget. Don't forget, I won't, about the missing Black girls, probably already dead in a ditch or a field somewhere. I'm not supposed to think about death, passing away, kick the bucket 6 feet under, meeting our maker, which is what my teacher said. The guinea pig had stopped moving. Mrs. Hayes poked its feet and then shoved it into a shoebox, said that we could bury it across from the tire swing in the back of the schoolyard. The dirt was ordinary, brown, hard. Eat your snack, said my mother. Twinkies from 7-Eleven, maybe Wawa. Nothing from Superfresh or Pathmark. White filling, creamy like white fungus, oozing like zit pus, besmirching golden cake. The news says nothing about Black girls that go missing, not even a speck in someone's unread newspaper. Silence is when we inherit ghosts. I see them taking victory laps every night. And I think I have time for one more or two more. Two more. Okay. So I'm going to read a short one and then I'll end with something positive. Okay. So the positive poem I like to read just so we can get into, a feel-good moment. But the next one I'll read is also political. And this is for those that have a challenging first name and people either mispronounce it on purpose or they rename you. I've been renamed Dee, Dorothy, Dolores, all kinds of names. So this is for those. I see you. This is a poem for you. It's called How I Lost My Name. Your name, Dorsia, booms heavy like wide-eyed darkness, said my teacher, as if light sat on his tongue. So I became a ticker tape of nothing to be called and vanished in a famine sounds. My classmates backboned this death sentence and left no disguise of this invisible girl at an elbow distance who waited her turn, like being asked to slow dance against a backdrop of double-edged drowning. And the last one is a positive poem. This is called G for Greenhood. And this is for those that need some positivity. I recommend, sometimes it's just taking 5 minutes for yourself, going for a walk, maybe seeing a certain color. For me, it's seeing the color green. I feel really positive when I see that color. Just kind of brings like a certain kind of energy. So this is called G is for Greenhood. G is for greenhood, for spring sitting on my shoulders, then fastening to eye level, chantus gladiolas spinning, bowing in the distance, scents of green greening until earth gets it right, green that I can't keep to myself. Say, green, belongs within reach like an extract of sepal outside of the flower body. You wouldn't recognize me when I cradle green, for fear of it becoming worn in many places. Even when morning lurks upside down, green, not this green, never hurts. Ask the turacos giving off green among drizzled leaves. Ask the grasshoppers that throw themselves against grass because it glistens. Ask wet green in my blood that hasn't forgotten spared green across homeland, where your green overlaps with mine. Thank you so much for being here and listening to my poems. Thank you. This was so lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorsia. Really amazing. I'm going to add a spotlight. Thank you so much. It was really
Thank
amazing.
you.
Lots of response in the chat room, which you can have a chance to look at a little
I
bit later.
haven't looked at the chat, but I
Well,
will. I
don't
promise.
worry about it. No, you can't look at it while you're reading your poems, for heaven's sakes. Wait a little bit. But I do want to say, if anyone has a question for Dorsia that you want me to ask in the next few minutes, please feel free to put in the chat room your question. Okay. Yes, I'll definitely buy your book. Yes, let us all definitely buy Dorsia's book.
Oh, yes, here. And please feel free to come to the book launch next week.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to leave it. Jen is really good about finding links. And so Jen, if you can dig up the link to that book launch with Kevin Carey, is Kevin Carey hosting it?
Yes, Kevin Carey is hosting.
Okay, good. So for those of us who could be available to go and support Dorsia also during the official launch, this is a preemptive launch. I love it. We are getting you hot off the press. So I do have a few questions. So one thing I wanted to ask was, this has been a number of years, this particular book. And what do you make of the timing in terms of the landing now? I'm sure that there was a process from the press and a personal process, but I guess I'm just sort of asking you kind of like, what do you make of how it's landing now?
Yeah, I'm so happy that it's landing now. I mentioned my background a little bit. I'm a writer with this is my first poetry book. I'm 51, so I was really pleased that Poets and Writers, I don't know if you subscribe to that, anybody out there, but there's a little profile of me. Thank you. There's a little profile of me in Poets and Writers. I'm one of the 5 over 50. And I mentioned in that I had a delay in writing. I had a choice between becoming a full professor or creative writing, and I took the different path, but it did work out in the sense that my first book is so important to me and it's so timely because when I was writing in my journal, and this is a formation of what happened with this book, when I was writing these poems, I didn't know they were poems. I was just writing in a journal. And Hurricane Maria was just so traumatic. I didn't want to worry my husband. I didn't want to worry. Our son was quite young at the time. So I was just writing in a journal, about the bee and waiting in line in the supermarket and how hot it was, the noise of the generator. I didn't want to worry anybody because everybody was under so much stress and tension. And for my son, I just wanted him to kind of have this moment of security and being a child. Oh, there's light outside. Let's just go play. I didn't want him to really have the fear and the worry of when is the power going to come back on? When's the water going to come back? When are things going to be normal? Because we had no answers. Our cell phones were not working. We had no cell service. So we were really in complete, limbo in that sense of just waiting for information. So I just started writing in the journal. Years went by, I went back and I thought, okay, I think these are poems. And then I had this book. Great. And Kevin Carey was on my radar and I sent the book in August for the call. I didn't get the call until March. So it's like a long process and you're just waiting and like you're hoping like, please pick my book, please pick my book. Because I didn't send it to many places. So they called me, they said, we're going to publish it. And then there's still the process because there's the cover, there's, where should we send your book? And then are you writing new poems? What's the format? So it's like a year later, you know, and then some when everything happens. And I could not have foreseen that this hurricane season was going to be so active, which I wish it wasn't. You know, but the book is even more timely. And I'm hoping that it'll get more people to recognize that we're in an environmental crisis. And then when we're looking at the social, racial, and political justices, you know, when I wrote the book, I was hoping things would be better in so many ways, but so many of the things in the book, you know, the discrimination against BIPOC people, you know, the sexism that we have. I mean, all of these things that I'm writing about in the book, we haven't, as I say, pushed the needle really anywhere. And I thought in that sense, we would have, had more of a social transformation. So when many people ask me, what's the purpose of the book? I'm like, well, social transformation, of course, but when's it going to happen? Now. I hope people galvanize and really move now. It's like the time is now. What are we waiting for now? We've been waiting too long now.
Let me just ask you, because I'm noting that you said repeatedly, I didn't want my husband and my child to worry. And it sounds like what you're saying is you sort of took some of your worries and concerns into this writing, into this journal writing, which you later discovered was poetry. So what I'm interested in having you comment on, if you would, is
Sure.
about this process of, I imagine the writing starts very personal in the
Yes.
journal, right? And yet these poems, at least the ones you've read tonight, they have a much broader view. And I'm curious about that process of transformation of the writing and what you were looking at and the lens at which you were looking at it with, and then moving into social transformation. At what point did you recognize that there was going to be this broader context to the writing, or was it already in there?
I think in many ways it was already in there. And I have to say, when I was writing in the journal, I think the advice, you write like a drunk person and then you edit as a sober person. I don't know if you've heard that advice. That is what worked for me. And I could only edit as a sober person because there was some emotional distancing there. When I was reading the journals, I was reading it sort of like, oh, I can't believe I wrote this. So it was like the outside me looking at the inside me. And I didn't really recognize, like all that I had, experienced. There was a lot of trauma that I had to unpack in those poems. And when I was, editing the poems and revising them, I was very cautious of, okay, how am I going to have this poem without it being, too overly sentimental or too heavy-handed, with, the melancholy. But I was only able to do that because I came back after a period of time. I was able to have this emotional distance. And in my opinion, if you experience something that traumatic, you may have to have that kind of emotional distance because, for me, I was just so close to it. And I could not have written, this book in 2017 or even 2018. I mean, I came back to the journal. It was like, it was like 2019, 2020. And by that point, we were also having the pandemic, and then Puerto Rico was also having, unfortunately, we had earthquakes, we had Zika, chikungunya, and dengue. So we had these health crises, happening in Puerto Rico as well. So having these other issues, I was able to think, okay, how can I put them also in the book? Because I didn't read all the poems that dealt with everything. But I wanted to show that these are issues that affect in so many ways all of us. We're all connected. And that's what I really got when I was revising the book. Even though these are personal experiences, these experiences are linked. When we think
They
about
absolutely transcend, they transcend the self.
they transcend, especially when I think of the global crisis that we have right now and how it's linked to so many economic injustices. When people mention, oh my goodness, what's happening in Florida, what's happening in Asheville. Well, this has been the warning for years that we're going to keep having intense hurricanes, is going to affect more people, and the devastation is going to be catastrophic. So what are we waiting for? You know, and so when I had the book in my mind, I thought, okay, you know, I'm writing about, you know, the environment and Hurricane Maria. I also said, okay, I want that to be the frame, but I also have to bring in how this environmental injustice is also linked to so many other injustices.
Mhm.
And I mention that because, you know, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States on paper, but it really functions more as a colony. And what does that mean? It means after Hurricane Maria, we had to literally beg for aid, you know, and other people said, but how come it didn't get to you? Because exactly, we're a colony. And so then people are suffering from not having water, not having electricity. I mean, in Puerto Rico, the longest area was almost 11 months without electricity. And why is that? Because you're treated like a colony. And so those kind of injustices, it's the same yardstick of oppression that we see what's happening right now with so many people in the United States. So I was trying to
So
show all these commonalities, because sometimes people think, you know, it's the hierarchy of oppression. It's the same yardstick. It's the same yardstick,
So you've
people.
you've really hit on a topic that is dealing with climate change, trauma, and of course, racial injustice, colonialism, all of these issues. Let me just touch base with Julie Morris has asked, I would love to know about what your writing process is like. And you know, you've answered that pretty much, but I guess I just would say maybe it would be interesting to hear, Julie, before I get to one more question that I noticed came into the chat room, maybe hear a little bit about how is your writing process now different than the one you used during the survival of the hurricane? And has there been a shift? Are you writing differently today as you work on future projects?
Yes, I think now I'm much more, I guess, hyper aware of time. And I'm also thinking of form differently, because when I was writing for, you know, at that moment of her career, I was just writing. Everything was just free writing. So some of it was just, you know, words on a page. Some of it was just lines. Now, when I write a poem, I'm automatically thinking of, okay, I'm thinking perhaps this could be 14 lines. I'm
You're
thinking, okay,
crafting a poem now. Before
it's
you were creating all this raw material, all this
exactly,
cathartic writing, perhaps all this expressive writing,
exactly.
and then now, but you're starting from a different frame. Okay, this
Yes.
writing poetry
Now it's
possibly.
a different frame, you know, and I'm already thinking of, okay, this is how I want the white space on the page to look. Should I have it on the right side indented? Do I want the poem in a box? I mean, so I think because I've taken workshops now and I've read, and now I'm completely immersed in the world of poetry, I'm coming at it from a different perspective now.
Yeah.
And it's not saying that you can't, you know, come from just writing in journals and then just having all this raw material. It's just now my time is very limited. When it was Hurricane Maria, everything stopped. So I wasn't working. I had all day to do whatever. And whatever meant pretty much, okay, let's just wash clothes, you know, keep my son occupied and try to, you know, gather some news. Now it's
And
very different. You know, now it's okay, back to work. My child's in school. My child has a very active life. I'm the, you know, the taxi driver one moment, taking my child here and there. And then I have duties as a professor at the university. So
yeah,
now when I approach writing, I have to be more strategic. I don't have the liberty of just, you know, spending 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours free writing. I have to come with it with the moment of, okay, I have X amount of time. How can I make this time be as
and
productive as possible?
and you've learned what you can do also. I want to touch on Stephen Energia's question as the last question. But before I do that, because I think it's a wonderful question and I want to take the time to do that, but I just want to mention, you know, this of course is the Journal of Expressive Writing. And, you know, I know that Jen, founder of the Journal of Expressive Writing, and many of us obviously really believe in the process so wholeheartedly that you describe
Yes.
in terms of writing through trauma, writing as a means
Yes.
of coping and handling your trauma. So it's really beautiful example of how a book emerged from the
Yes.
writing that even on its own, whether or not it ever became a book, was serving you so
Oh, yes.
successfully. But let me get to Stephen's question. I just want to put a plug in, you know, for people, send Jen your writing, your expressive writing. That's what this journal is all about. So question, Stephen asks, thinking about your lines about getting forcibly turned into myth, as well as the reference to the myth of the chupacabra, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Recently took a workshop on Latinx myth making with Vincent Toro. What would you say your relationship is to myth and myth making in poetry and life? Just a simple
Yes.
question to end with.
I love that question. And Vincent Toro, he wrote the foreword of my book. So
Oh,
yes, Vincent Toro, and he will be at the book launch next week. Yes. So
okay.
Vincent is so great. I think it's really interesting about myth, because we have to look at the power of who is telling that myth and what the purpose of that myth is. Because sometimes what happens with myth making, certain people, and I'm thinking again of Inheritance of Drowning, certain people are going to disappear with myth. And so when you look at them, their history, they think, well, there's nothing significant. There are no contributions because there's nothing concrete. But if you have the power with that myth, okay, if you control that narrative, then I think it's really important to show what comes out of that myth. And there have been beautiful, you know, books and poems and stories that have come out of myth. And I'm thinking of a lot of traditions that have been surrounded in myth. But again, it goes back to who is telling again that myth, who is telling that story, because who is telling that story has the power of that myth, how it's going to be interpreted and how it's going to be perceived. So I think that's really important, that certain things don't get lost. And I'm thinking of certain cultural significances that don't get lost when you're having that myth. So that's really important, because for me, like living in Puerto Rico, some people will say the Taínos, oh, that's all myth. No, the Taínos were real, you know, and then you have to look at the history. So then, but who's been telling this history that the Taínos were not real? So that's what's really important to me. Who's telling this story, and who, and what's the purpose? But myths can be very powerful, you know, and I think of, again, you know, there are Native American myths, there are certain myths in Puerto Rico, and there's a lot of power and special significance that it has when you tell that myth, because there's a meaning behind that myth. So I would look at who's telling that story.
Beautiful. Dorsia, you know, I am feeling like I'm just about to leap out of my chair. This has been so freaking stimulating.
Oh, thank
Beautiful,
you.
beautifully. You know, we could sit here and I know I could sit here and talk to you all night. And I think that there are probably other questions, but and hear your beautiful writing, but we do need to shift into the open mic now. And again, I'm just so grateful. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having
Oh, thank
such
you for
perfect
having me.
timing to bring us into this place, these places of concern, the poignancy and the beauty of your writing, I think are particularly resonant tonight,
Thank
and
you.
your voice and your interest and your own enthusiasm about this project and about social transformation. And so thanks for being here. I
Thank
hope you'll
you.
have a chance to read the chats, you know, in the chat room as we hear now from our readers. So I'm going to take you and me off the spotlight and remove spotlight. And now we're going to move into the open mic. I'm going to turn off